Greetings, everyone. My name is Emmanuel, and I would like to welcome you to our program today. We are continuing with our series on rebuilding a new Africa through decentralization. The last time we were together, we talked about the role of the church in supporting and defending the poor and the needy, the fatherless, the widows, and the oppressed in our communities and nations. Today, we are going to continue talking about the role of the church in delivering the oppressed and the marginalized in our communities and nations because of injustice that seems to be everywhere. Many people, including Christians, are being oppressed and marginalized, especially in Africa. Therefore, the church has a role in participating towards the deliverance of the oppressed and the marginalized in our communities and nations. You see, God delivers the oppressed and the marginalized. A good example of this is found in the Old Testament, when the children of Israel were in captivity in Egypt for over 400 years. They cried unto God, and God heard their prayers. As a result, God raised up Moses to deliver the children of Israel from their captivity in Egypt. The God that we serve is a God who fights on the side of the oppressed and the marginalized. The God that we serve fights for the oppressed and the marginalized. He stands and supports the oppressed and the marginalized. We are sons of God. We must follow the example of our Father who is in heaven. He is a deliverer. Therefore, the church must also deliver the oppressed and the marginalized in our communities and nations. You see, the blacks were also marginalized in America. But the black churches in America rose up. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., together with other black leaders, peacefully protested against the oppression and marginalization of the blacks in America. As a result of their demonstrations, their peaceful protests, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which legally ended segregation in America and banned employment discrimination in public places on the basis of race, color, religion, and nationality. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson also signed the Voting Rights Act, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting against the blacks. The blacks were hindered from fully participating in voting, but the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 granted the blacks the authority to fully participate in voting in America. That happened because the black churches rose up. They organized themselves. They protested against racial discrimination in voting. So the black church helped to deliver the blacks who were segregated in America. The black church helped to deliver the blacks who were racially discriminated in voting in America. You see, the role, today we are talking about the role of the church in delivering the oppressed and the marginalized. The blacks were marginalized. The blacks were oppressed in America. But the black church, together with other white sympathizers, fought, resisted, organized themselves, and peacefully protested against segregation in America. And they won. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the Voting Rights Act of 1964 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Another example of how the church brought deliverance to people is the example that happened in South Africa. The blacks were oppressed under the apartheid regime in South Africa. Archbishop Desmond Tutu and other church leaders in South Africa protested peacefully against the oppression of the blacks. Desmond Tutu in particular traveled around the world calling upon nations and political leaders and business leaders to impose economic sanctions upon the apartheid regime in South Africa. Because of his efforts, in 1994, Mandela became the president of South Africa. Apartheid was destroyed in South Africa in 1994. Another example of how the church brought deliverance to millions of people around the world is through the work of Pope John Paul II, who collaborated with President Reagan of America and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of Great Britain to bring down communism, to bring down the former Soviet Union, the demise of communism. It happened because Pope John Paul II, the leader of the Catholic Church, worked with President Reagan and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher to bring down communism. The role of the church in delivering the oppressed and the marginalized. We've seen the example in America, we've seen the example in South Africa, and we've seen the example of how Pope John Paul II worked with secular leaders to destroy and dismantle communism that has brought, destroyed lives. The church in Africa should stand up. It is time for the church in Africa to stand up, to fight for the oppressed and the marginalized in our communities and nations. And the church can do this through three simple ways. The first one is for the church to raise up sons and daughters and encourage them to participate in politics so that they will pass moral laws that will deliver the oppressed and the marginalized. Just like what happened in America when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, delivering the blacks from segregation and delivering the blacks from racial discrimination in voting. The second way through which the church in Africa can participate in the deliverance of the oppressed and the marginalized is through voting. When we have elections in our nations, the church should encourage their members to vote for ethical leaders who will pass moral laws that will deliver the oppressed and the marginalized in our communities. The third way through which the church can deliver the oppressed and the marginalized is for the church to peacefully protest against the oppressive measures of our governments in Africa, so that there will be constitutional reforms in our communities and nations in Africa. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please share this video with your friends and family members. We are going to continue tomorrow. Until tomorrow, bye-bye.